Sarah Mitchell stood in the marble foyer of her Malibu mansion, adjusting the emerald silk of her maternity gown. At 7 months pregnant, she felt both radiant and vulnerable, like a precious vessel navigating a world of sharp edges. Tonight was supposed to be their night. Marcus Wellington, her husband of 5 years, was receiving the Tech Innovation Award for his groundbreaking work at Wellington Digital. The dress, custom made by a coveted designer, had been tailored to celebrate her changing form. It cascaded over her bump in a waterfall of deep green. She had chosen the color carefully, wanting to complement Marcus's tuxedo, wanting to be the perfect accessory to his success. Marcus emerged from his study, fixing his bow tie. He looked every inch the tech visionary that had graced magazine covers worldwide. At 38, he possessed the kind of confidence that came from turning a single algorithm into a billion-dollar empire. "You look incredible, Sarah," he said, but his eyes were already checking his phone. "Thank you," she replied, placing a gentle hand on her belly. "I have something special to tell you tonight, after your speech." He glanced up briefly. "Can it wait? Tonight's about the company, about our future." Their future. Sarah had believed in that future for so long. They had met in college, both ambitious, both dreaming of changing the world. She had been the marketing executive who helped launch his first startup. Then, as his success grew, he had convinced her to step back, to focus on building their family. The black Escalade waited in the circular driveway. As they settled into the leather seats, Sarah noticed a small object wedged between the cushions. Her fingers closed around it instinctively. A pregnancy test. Positive. Her heart stopped. She was already pregnant. This wasn't hers. "Marcus," she began, holding up the test. He glanced over, and for a split second, she saw something flicker across his face. Panic. Guilt. Then his expression smoothed into practiced concern. "That's probably from when we were trying," he said quickly. "You know how stressed you've been. Maybe you forgot." But Sarah remembered every test, every disappointment, every hope dashed month after month. This test was new. The plastic was pristine, unmarked by the desperate handling of her own failed attempts. She slipped it into her purse without another word, a cold stone forming in her stomach. Tonight was supposed to be about celebration. Instead, questions multiplied in her mind like viruses in a system. As they drove through the winding roads of Beverly Hills toward the Century Plaza Hotel, Sarah stared out at the glittering lights of Los Angeles. Each light represented a life, a story, a truth. Tonight, she feared, she was about to discover the truth about her own. The hotel's grand ballroom buzzed with the energy of 800 of the tech world's most powerful figures. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over a sea of designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. This was Marcus's world now, and she had been content to exist on its periphery. The supportive wife, the beautiful ornament. Sarah had spent the last 3 years attending these events, making polite conversation with venture capitalists' wives, organizing charity committees, playing the role she thought she wanted. But standing here now, with the pregnancy test burning in her purse like evidence of a crime, she wondered if she had lost herself completely. Marcus was immediately swept into conversations with investors and competitors. Sarah watched him work the room with the skill of a master politician, his charm deployed with surgical precision. She had fallen in love with that charm once. Now it felt calculated, performative. "Sarah, darling." "Sorry, worm." Diane Wellington, Marcus's mother, appeared at her elbow. At 65, Diane was still formidable, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her navy dress understated but expensive. She served on Wellington Digital's board of directors and had never quite approved of Sarah. "You look tired, dear," Diane continued, her voice carrying just enough concern to sound caring while delivering an insult. "Perhaps you should consider staying home more often. These events can be so taxing in your condition." "I'm fine, Diane," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "I wouldn't miss Marcus's big night." Diane's eyes glittered with something Sarah couldn't quite identify. "Yes, well, family loyalty is so important, especially now." Before Sarah could ask what she meant, Diane melded back into the crowd, leaving Sarah with the unsettling feeling that she was missing something crucial. The lights dimmed and the evening's program began. Marcus would speak last. the crown jewel of the ceremony. Sarah found her assigned seat at the head table, next to an empty chair marked for Marcus. She wondered where he was, scanning the room until she spotted him near the bar. He wasn't alone. Amber Cross stood next to Marcus at the bar, her red dress a bold statement against the room's more conservative palette. As Wellington Digital's head of public relations, Amber had worked closely with Marcus for the past 2 years. She was brilliant, ambitious, and at 26, possessed the kind of sharp beauty that turned heads. Sarah had always liked Amber, had even championed her promotion. Amber was everything Sarah had once been before pregnancy, and domesticity had softened her edges. Watching them together now, Sarah noticed things she had somehow missed before. The way Amber's hand lingered on Marcus's arm when she spoke. The intimate space between them that suggested familiarity beyond the professional. The way Marcus's posture changed around her, becoming more animated, more alive than Sarah had seen him in months. A waiter approached their table. "Mrs. Wellington, champagne." "Just water, please," Sarah murmured, unable to look away from her husband and his protege. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Sarah's obstetrician, slid into the seat beside her. Elena was attending as a guest of the medical technology sponsors, and her presence was a welcome relief. "How are you feeling?" Elena asked, following Sarah's gaze across the room. "Confused," Sarah admitted. "Elena, is it possible to have a positive pregnancy test if you're already pregnant?" Elena's eyebrows rose. "It's extremely rare. Why do you ask?" Sarah showed her the test she had found in the car. Elena examined it carefully. "This is a different brand than the one we used at my office," Elena said slowly. "And see this date code? This test was manufactured last month. Where did you find this?" Before Sarah could answer, the lights dimmed further, and the evening's host took the stage. The program moved through its paces with awards for innovation in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and sustainable technology. Sarah applauded mechanically, her mind churning. Marcus finally took a seat beside her, just as the penultimate award was presented. He smelled faintly of Amber's perfume, a scent Sarah recognized because she had helped Amber choose it during a shopping trip last year. "Sorry I'm late," he whispered. "Networking opportunities." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched his profile as he focused on the stage. This man she had loved for over a decade. When had he become a stranger? The host returned to the podium. "Our final award tonight honors not just innovation, but leadership and vision. The recipient has revolutionized data security while maintaining the highest ethical standards. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2025 Tech Innovation Award goes to Marcus Wellington, CEO of Wellington Digital." The room erupted in applause. Marcus stood, buttoning his tuxedo jacket, and moved toward the stage with the confident stride of a man accustomed to victory. Sarah clapped until her palms stung, playing her part even as her world tilted on its axis. Marcus accepted the Crystal Award, a substantial piece that caught the stage lights like a prism. He stepped to the microphone with the easy grace of a natural performer. "Thank you," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "This award represents not just my work, but the dedication of our entire team at Wellington Digital." Sarah found herself holding her breath, hoping he would mention her, acknowledge their partnership in building the company from nothing. "Innovation requires risk," Marcus continued. "It requires the courage to pursue what others think is impossible. But most importantly, it requires inspiration." He paused, scanning the audience. His eyes found Amber, who stood near the back of the room, her red dress unmistakable in the sea of black and navy. "Great achievements are never solitary efforts," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "Behind every breakthrough is someone who challenges you, who pushes you beyond your comfort zone. Someone who sees your potential even when you don't see it yourself." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. These were not the words of a man about to thank his wife. "Which is why," Marcus continued, "I want to share this moment with the person who has truly inspired Wellington Digital's greatest innovations. Amber Cross, would you join me on stage?" The room fell silent. This was not part of the program. Sarah felt every eye in the ballroom turn toward their table, then toward Amber, then back to her. The pregnancy test in her purse suddenly made terrible sense. Amber moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had been expecting this moment. She climbed the stage steps gracefully, and Marcus took her hand, pulling her close to the microphone. "This award," Marcus announced, his arm around Amber's waist, "belongs to both of us for everything we've built together." And then in front of 800 of the tech industry's most influential people, in front of cameras that were broadcasting live, in front of his pregnant wife, Marcus Wellington kissed Amber Cross. It wasn't a polite peck on the cheek. It was the deep, passionate kiss of a man declaring ownership, claiming territory, announcing to the world that he was no longer bound by conventional rules. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then the cameras began clicking like machine guns, and the murmur of shocked voices rose like a tide. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, one hand protectively over her belly, feeling as though she were drowning in plain sight of 800 people who were too shocked to throw her a rope. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Phones appeared like weapons, capturing the aftermath of Marcus's declaration. Sarah remained seated, her hands folded in her lap, a study in composure while her world crumbled around her. She could hear fragments of conversation, whispered words that cut like glass. His wife? 7 months pregnant. Did you see her face? How could he? Marcus finally broke the kiss, grinning at the audience with the satisfied expression of a man who had just conquered new territory. Amber's lipstick was smeared, her eyes bright with victory. They looked like teenagers who had just spray-painted their names on a building, thrilled by their own audacity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said into the microphone, "sometimes the heart wants what it wants." The audience remained stunned into silence. This wasn't the tech innovation they had come to celebrate. This was a public execution of a marriage, broadcast live to thousands of viewers. Sarah stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor in the unnatural quiet. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. She felt like an actress who had forgotten her lines in the middle of a play, expected to perform, but given no script. Dr. Vasquez appeared at her side. "Sarah, let me take you home." "No," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. As she walked toward the exit, her legs felt disconnected from her body. The faces around her blurred into a sea of pity and schadenfreude. Some looked genuinely concerned. Others seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. Jake Reynolds, her college friend who now worked as an investigative journalist for the Los Angeles Times, intercepted her near the doors. His face was grim, his notebook already out. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he said. "Do you want to make a statement?" "Not now, Jake," she managed. "If you need anything," he pressed a card into her hand, "call me. I mean it." Outside, the California evening was warm and gentle, a stark contrast to the frigid atmosphere she had left behind. Sarah stood on the hotel steps, breathing deeply, trying to process what had just happened. Her phone buzzed incessantly with text messages, calls, notifications. The video was already going viral. Tech CEO Marcus Wellington kisses mistress on stage while pregnant wife watches was trending on Twitter. The comments ranged from outraged support for Sarah to cruel speculation about her marriage. The Escalade pulled up, and Sarah slid into the back seat. The driver, James, who had worked for them for 3 years, met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wellington," he said simply. Those 4 words broke something inside her. Sarah pressed her face to the window and finally allowed herself to cry. Back home, the mansion felt like a mausoleum. Every room held memories of her life with Marcus, now tainted by his betrayal. She walked through their bedroom, seeing it with new eyes. His bedside table held an extra phone charger. His closet contained cologne she didn't recognize. How had she missed these signs? Sarah changed into comfortable clothes and settled into the nursery she had been preparing. 2 cribs sat side by side, waiting for the twins she was carrying. She had spent months choosing the perfect shade of yellow paint, selecting furniture that would grow with their children. Now she wondered if Marcus would even want these babies, or if they would be inconvenient reminders of the life he was discarding. Her phone rang. "Marcus." "Sarah, we need to talk." His voice was different, colder. "I think you said everything you needed to say tonight," she replied. "Don't be dramatic. You knew this marriage wasn't working." The casual cruelty of his words took her breath away. "I knew our marriage wasn't working. Marcus, I've been trying to save our marriage while you've been planning its destruction. Look, I'll make sure you're taken care of financially, but I can't pretend anymore. Amber and I, we're having a baby." Sarah closed her eyes. The pregnancy test made sense now. How long? 4 months. 4 months. While Sarah had been suffering through morning sickness, planning nurseries, dreaming of their family, Marcus had been creating a different family entirely. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours," he continued. "This doesn't have to be messy." "It's already messy, Marcus. You made it messy when you humiliated me in front of 800 people. You're overreacting. It's just business." Business. He was talking about the destruction of their marriage like it was a corporate merger. After he hung up, Sarah sat in the darkened nursery for hours, watching the moon track across the sky. She thought about the woman she had been before Marcus, ambitious and fierce. That woman seemed like a character from a book she had read long ago. By morning, the story had exploded across every media platform. Entertainment outlets picked up the tech news, turning it into a human interest story about betrayal and public humiliation. Sarah's phone rang constantly with requests for interviews, statements, exclusive tells. She turned it off and tried to think clearly. Marcus was right about one thing. This didn't have to be completely messy. She had rights, assets, claimed to half of everything they had built together. The house, the company stock, the investment accounts. She wasn't helpless. Sarah called the best divorce attorney in Los Angeles, someone Jake had recommended years ago during a different story. Margaret Chen had a reputation for representing wives of powerful men, and her fees reflected her success rate. "Mrs. Wellington," Margaret's voice was crisp and professional, "I've been expecting your call. Can you come in this afternoon?" At Margaret's Beverly Hills office, Sarah felt the first stirring of hope. The conference room walls were lined with photographs of Margaret with various clients, many of whom Sarah recognized as women who had emerged from high-profile divorces not just intact, but empowered. "The good news," Margaret said, spreading documents across the polished table, "is that California is a community property state. Generally speaking, you're entitled to half of all marital assets." "And the bad news?" Margaret's expression grew cautious. "The bad news is that your husband is a very wealthy man with very expensive lawyers. These cases can become quite complicated." They spent 2 hours reviewing Sarah's situation. The house was in both names. Sarah owned 15% of Wellington Digital stock, a stake she had been granted during the company's early days. There were investment accounts, real estate holdings, art collections. "On paper," Margaret concluded, "you should be able to maintain your current lifestyle and provide excellent security for your children." Sarah left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time since the awards ceremony. She had resources, legal rights, and most importantly, public sympathy. The viral video had painted Marcus as a callous villain and her as a victimized pregnant woman. In the court of public opinion, she was winning decisively. That feeling lasted exactly 18 hours. Sarah woke to cramping pain that radiated across her belly like fire. At first, she thought it was stress, the physical manifestation of emotional trauma. But as she tried to stand, a gush of fluid soaked through her nightgown. "No, no, no," she whispered, reaching for her phone with shaking hands. Dr. Vasquez answered on the second ring. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "Something's happening. There's fluid and cramping, and I'm only 31 weeks. I'm calling an ambulance. Don't move." The next few hours blurred together in a haze of sirens, hospital corridors, and urgent medical voices. Sarah found herself in a private room at Cedars-Sinai, monitors beeping around her, IV tubes snaking from her arms. "The babies are in distress," Dr. Vasquez explained, her usually calm demeanor strained. "Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and you're showing signs of preeclampsia. We need to deliver immediately." "It's too early," Sarah protested, tears streaming down her face. "The alternative is worse. We're taking you to surgery now." The emergency cesarean section saved all 3 lives by minutes. Sarah's twins, a boy and a girl, were rushed to the neonatal intensive care unit, their tiny bodies connected to machines that breathed for them, fed them, monitored every heartbeat. Sarah named them Emma and Michael after her grandparents. They were so small, so fragile, their skin translucent and their movements barely perceptible. The doctors spoke in careful, measured tones about survival rates, potential complications, the long road ahead. For 3 days, Sarah barely left the NICU. She pumped breast milk every 3 hours, read to the babies through the eSolettes, and prayed to gods she wasn't sure she believed in. Marcus visited once, standing awkwardly at the foot of Emma's eSolette, looking uncomfortable and out of place. "They're going to be fine," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are they?" Sarah asked. "Dr. Kim says the next 72 hours are critical." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Sarah, I know the timing is terrible, but my lawyers need to file some paperwork, temporary custody arrangements, financial support, that sort of thing." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Our children are fighting for their lives, and you're worried about paperwork?" "I'm trying to be practical. These things are easier to sort out early." "Get out," Sarah said quietly. "Sarah, get out of here, Marcus. Don't come back unless you're here for them, not for your lawyers." He left without another word, and Sarah turned back to her babies, singing softly to them through the plastic barriers that separated them from the world. On the fourth day, Emma and Michael's conditions stabilized. Their breathing improved, their heart rate steadied, and Dr. Kim cautiously upgraded their prognosis. Sarah felt a surge of relief so intense it left her dizzy. "They're fighters," Dr. Kim said with a smile, "just like their mother." Sarah was discharged the following day with instructions to rest, recover, and visit the babies as often as she wanted. The NICU would be their home for at least another month, but they were expected to develop normally. Returning to the empty mansion was surreal. The nursery she had prepared mocked her with its readiness, 2 cribs waiting for babies who were miles away, connected to machines. Sarah spent the afternoon moving the cribs to her bedroom, creating a space where Emma and Michael would eventually sleep close to her. Margaret Chen called that evening with an update on the divorce proceedings. "The public response has been overwhelmingly in your favor," Margaret reported. "Marcus is being eviscerated in the media. 3 major clients have already distanced themselves from Wellington Digital. The board is apparently considering damage control measures." "Good," Sarah said, surprised by the venom in her own voice. "There's more. I've had preliminary discussions with Marcus's legal team. They're interested in reaching a quick, generous settlement. I think we can get you 70% of the marital assets plus full custody." 70% seemed like justice. Full custody felt like victory. For the first time since the awards ceremony, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a future where she had won. That night, she slept deeply for the first time in a week. She dreamed of bringing Emma and Michael home, of raising them in the beautiful house overlooking the Pacific, of building a life that was hers alone. She woke to her doorbell ringing insistently at 6 in the morning. 2 men in dark suits stood on her doorstep, badges gleaming in the early morning light. "Mrs. Wellington, we're from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. We have a court order for the emergency removal of minors Emma and Michael Wellington pending a competency hearing." Sarah's world tilted. "What are you talking about? My children are in the hospital." The shorter deputy handed her a thick manila envelope. "You'll need to appear in family court Monday morning. Until then, your husband has been granted temporary emergency custody." "On what grounds?" Sarah's voice rose to a shriek. "Mental instability, endangerment of minors, and substance abuse during pregnancy," the taller deputy read from his paperwork. The accusations hit her like physical blows. Mental instability because she had suffered complications from stress, endangerment because the babies were premature, substance abuse because she had been prescribed anti-anxiety medication during her pregnancy. "This is insane," Sarah protested. "I've never used drugs. The medication was prescribed by my doctor." "Ma'am, you'll need to address these issues with the court," the deputy said, not unkindly. "For now, you're prohibited from visiting the minors without supervision." They left her standing in her doorway, holding papers that had just stolen her children from her. Sarah sank to the marble floor of her foyer and wept until she had no tears left. Marcus had played the game better than she had imagined possible. While she had been focused on financial settlements and custody arrangements, he had been building a case to paint her as an unfit mother. The stress-induced medical emergency had given him the ammunition he needed. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Told you family loyalty was important? You should have listened. Diane." Marcus's mother had tried to warn her, in her twisted way. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a war, and Sarah had been fighting with outdated weapons while her opponents had deployed nuclear missiles. She called Margaret Chen, but it was Saturday morning, and the attorney didn't answer. She called Dr. Vasquez, who was horrified but helpless. She called the hospital, but they confirmed that Marcus had indeed been granted temporary custody and that she could not visit her own children without a court-appointed supervisor. Sarah sat in her empty mansion, surrounded by wealth that meant nothing, married to a man who had systematically destroyed her, separated from the children she had nearly died to bring into the world. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wondered if she had the strength to fight back. Sarah spent the weekend in a fog of grief and rage, pacing through her empty house like a ghost haunting her own life. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about Emma and Michael alone in their isolettes, while strangers made decisions about their care. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching her mood as she sat in family court beside Margaret Chen. The courtroom was sterile and intimidating, designed to strip away pretense and reduce human complexity to legal arguments. Marcus sat across the aisle with his legal team, a phalanx of expensive suits led by Richard Steinberg, the most feared family law attorney in California. Marcus looked polished and concerned, playing the role of a responsible father protecting his children from an unstable mother. Judge Patricia Hoffman, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the emergency petition with practiced efficiency. Her expression revealed nothing as she read the allegations against Sarah. "Mrs. Wellington," Judge Hoffman began, "you're accused of endangering your children through reckless behavior during pregnancy. How do you respond?" Sarah stood on shaking legs. "Your Honor, I followed every medical recommendation. The premature labor was caused by stress from discovering my husband's very public affair." "The medical records show you were prescribed lorazepam during your pregnancy," Steinberg interjected, "a controlled substance that can cause birth defects." "Prescribed by my doctor for severe anxiety," Margaret countered, "a legitimate medical treatment approved by her obstetrician." Judge Hoffman held up a hand for silence. "I've reviewed Dr. Vasquez's notes. The medication was appropriately prescribed and monitored. However, I'm concerned about the circumstances surrounding the premature birth." "Your Honor," Steinberg continued, "my client has documented Mrs. Wellington's increasingly erratic behavior over the past months. Paranoid accusations, emotional outbursts, failure to maintain appropriate boundaries with household staff." Sarah felt her face flush. "That's completely false." "Is it?" Steinberg produced a stack of papers. "We have signed statements from household employees describing incidents of verbal abuse, property destruction, and inappropriate demands." Margaret quickly scanned the documents, her expression growing grim. "Your Honor, we haven't seen these alleged statements. We request time to investigate their authenticity." "The children's safety takes precedence," Judge Hoffman ruled. "I'm maintaining the temporary custody order for now, but I'm modifying it to allow supervised visitation twice daily at the hospital." It was a partial victory, but Sarah felt hollow as she left the courthouse. She could see her babies, but only under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor who would document her every word and gesture. That afternoon, Sarah sat beside Emma's isolette with Mrs. Patterson, a stern-faced social worker who took notes on everything from how Sarah held the baby's finger to how long she spent reading to them. "They're beautiful," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice softer than her appearance suggested. "They're everything to me," Sarah replied, gently stroking Emma's tiny hand. "Mr. Wellington seems very concerned about providing stability for them." Sarah looked up sharply. "You've met with Marcus?" "Of course. He's the primary custodial parent currently." The words stung, but Sarah forced herself to remain calm. Any emotional outburst would be noted in Mrs. Patterson's report. She spent her allotted hour reading to the babies and singing softly, performing maternal devotion for an audience of one. After leaving the hospital, Sarah drove aimlessly through Los Angeles, trying to process the surreal turn her life had taken. She found herself in Griffith Park, sitting on a bench overlooking the city where she had built her life with Marcus. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake Reynolds. "Can we meet? I have information you need to see." They met at a quiet coffee shop in Los Feliz, far from the Beverly Hills social circles where Sarah might be recognized. Jake looked haggard, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled. "I've been digging into Marcus's finances," he said without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the table. "What I found is going to shock you." Sarah opened the folder to find bank statements, wire transfer records, and corporate filings. The numbers were staggering, but she couldn't make sense of the patterns. "Marcus has been systematically moving money out of joint accounts for the past 8 months," Jake explained. "Not just personal funds, but corporate money too. Look at this." He pointed to a series of transactions from Wellington Digital's charity foundation. These transfers were supposedly for technology grants to underprivileged schools. But I tracked the recipient accounts. They're shell companies. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your husband has been embezzling from his own charity for months. The money's been flowing into offshore accounts controlled by a trust. And guess who's listed as the beneficiary?" Sarah studied the documents, her marketing background helping her follow the financial trail. "Diane Wellington. His mother has been helping him hide assets in preparation for your divorce. But it gets worse." Jake pulled out another set of papers. "I also found this." It was a medical record from a private clinic in Austin. Sarah read it twice before the implications sank in. "Amber's pregnancy is documented here as beginning 14 months ago, not 4 months like Marcus told you. She had a miscarriage last year." Sarah's hands trembled as she held the papers. "But she's pregnant now. She's 4 months along, exactly like Marcus said. But this isn't their first pregnancy together. They've been having an affair for at least 18 months, probably longer." The timeline rearranged itself in Sarah's mind like puzzle pieces snapping into place. Marcus hadn't fallen for Amber during a moment of weakness. He had been planning his exit from their marriage for over a year, systematically hiding assets and building a case against her, while she remained obliviously devoted. "There's more," Jake said gently. "I talked to some of your former household staff, the ones who were supposedly quit or were fired. They were actually paid to sign those statements about your behavior. None of it happened." Sarah felt nauseated. "How did you find all this?" "Marcus made one mistake. He underestimated how many people he'd hurt along the way. Fired employees, former business partners, competitors he'd cheated. They were willing to talk once I started asking the right questions." "What do I do with this information?" Jake leaned forward, his expression intense. "You fight back. Marcus thinks he's covered all his bases, but charity fraud is a federal crime. The IRS and the FBI take this stuff very seriously." Sarah stared at the documents that could destroy her husband's life as thoroughly as he had destroyed hers. The evidence was damning, comprehensive, and apparently ironclad. She could hand it to the authorities and watch Marcus's empire crumble. But using it would mean declaring total war, burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. It would mean her children growing up knowing their father was a convicted felon. It would mean years of legal battles, media scrutiny, and ugly headlines. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Don't take too long," Jake warned. "Marcus is moving fast. My sources say he's planning to relocate the corporate headquarters to Austin, coincidentally where Amber's family lives. Once he establishes residency in Texas, the legal landscape changes significantly." Sarah took the folder and drove home through the gathering dusk. Her mansion felt larger and emptier than ever, filled with the ghost of the life she had thought was real. She spread Jake's evidence across her dining room table and studied it like a general planning a campaign. Marcus had been methodical in his betrayal, but he had made mistakes. His arrogance had led him to trust too many people, leave too many trails. The same attention to detail that had made him a successful CEO had also created a comprehensive record of his crimes. Her phone rang. Dr. Vasquez. "Sarah, I have wonderful news. Emma and Michael's progress has been exceptional. If they continue improving at this rate, they could be discharged as early as next week." Discharged? To where? To Marcus's house, where they would be raised by a man who had systematically destroyed their mother? To a life where Sarah would be a weekend visitor in her own children's lives. "That's wonderful," Sarah managed, though her heart was breaking. After hanging up, Sarah walked to the nursery and sat between the two cribs, imagining Emma and Michael sleeping peacefully in their own home. She thought about the woman she had been before Marcus, ambitious and strong. That woman wouldn't have hesitated to fight. Sarah reached for her phone and dialed Jake's number. "I'm ready," she said when he answered. Let's burn it all down. The federal investigation moved with surprising speed once Jake delivered his evidence to the FBI's white-collar crime division. Within 72 hours, agents were executing search warrants at Wellington Digital's headquarters, Diane Wellington's Beverly Hills home, and the Austin offices where much of the charity fraud had been orchestrated. Sarah watched the raids unfold on the morning news from her hospital chair beside Emma's Isolette. The babies had continued to thrive, and doctors were optimistic about their discharge within days. For the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah felt a surge of hope. That feeling lasted exactly 3 hours. Richard Steinberg's call came at noon, his voice cold and professional. Mrs. Wellington, I'm calling as a courtesy to inform you that my client will be filing additional motions in family court this afternoon. What kind of motions? Given the federal investigation and the adverse publicity, Mr. Wellington believes it's in the children's best interest to relocate immediately to a more stable environment. We're requesting permission to move the minors to Austin, pending resolution of the custody matter. Sarah's world tilted. You can't take my children to Texas. The court will decide what's in their best interest. I should also inform you that Mr. Wellington is prepared to present evidence that you initiated the federal investigation as an act of spite, further demonstrating your unfitness as a parent. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in disbelief. She called Margaret Chen immediately. Can he do this? Sarah asked desperately. He can request it, Margaret said grimly. And given that he has temporary custody, the judge might view relocation as a reasonable way to protect the children from the media circus surrounding the federal investigation. But I started the investigation to expose his crimes, which his attorneys will frame as vindictive behavior that prioritizes revenge over the children's well-being. Sarah, I have to be honest with you. This complicates our position significantly. That afternoon's court hearing was a disaster. Judge Hoffman, clearly frustrated by the escalating complexity of the case, listened as Steinberg painted Sarah as a bitter ex-wife who had weaponized federal law enforcement to destroy her children's father. Your Honor, Steinberg argued, Mrs. Wellington's actions demonstrate a concerning pattern of prioritizing personal vengeance over family stability. The children deserve to grow up away from this toxic environment. Margaret fought valiantly, but the damage was done. Judge Hoffman, faced with federal investigations, media attention, and 2 premature babies caught in the crossfire, made the decision Sarah had dreaded. I'm granting temporary permission for the minors to relocate to Austin with their father, pending further review. This will remove them from the current media environment and provide stability during their critical developmental period. Sarah felt her knees buckle. In one afternoon, she had lost her children not just to Marcus, but to geography. Austin was 800 miles away, a different state with different laws and different judges who would know nothing about her story. The next morning, Sarah stood in the NICU as strangers prepared Emma and Michael for transport to an Austin hospital. The babies, still tiny but stable enough for the journey, were being loaded into specialized transport isolettes. Marcus supervised the process with clinical detachment, speaking to the medical team but ignoring Sarah completely. He had won so completely that he didn't even need to gloat. Mama loves you, Sarah whispered to each baby, kissing their foreheads through the plastic barriers. Mama will find a way to bring you home. As the transport team wheeled her children toward the elevator, Sarah felt something fundamental break inside her. The elevator doors closed, and Emma and Michael disappeared from her life. She drove home in a trance, barely aware of the traffic around her. The mansion felt like a tomb, every room echoing with the absence of the life she had planned to build there. The nursery was the worst, with its careful decorations and waiting cribs, mocking her failure to protect her children. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and well-meaning friends. She ignored them all, sitting in the dark and trying to understand how completely she had been outmaneuvered. Jake arrived that evening with takeout food she couldn't eat and news that felt meaningless. The FBI is confident they have enough evidence to indict Marcus and Diane for charity fraud, he said. The case is solid. My children are in Austin, Sarah replied flatly. Marcus won. This isn't over, Sarah. The federal charges change everything. Do they? Will they bring Emma and Michael home? Will they give me back the year I'll miss watching them grow up? Jake had no answer for that. He sat with her in the gathering darkness, a loyal friend watching her wrestle with the ruins of her life. That night, Sarah wandered through her empty house, past the formal dining room where she had hosted dinner parties, through the kitchen where she had planned family meals, up the stairs to the master bedroom where she had shared a bed with a man who had been methodically destroying her for over a year. She found herself in her walk-in closet, staring at the maternity clothes she would no longer need, the designer gowns from a social life that no longer existed. At the back of the closet, she discovered a box she had forgotten about. Inside were mementos from her life before Marcus, her college diploma in marketing, photos from her first job at a struggling startup, awards from campaigns that had helped launch unknown companies into major brands, business cards from when she had been Sarah Mitchell, marketing executive, before she became Sarah Wellington, trophy wife. Sarah sat on the closet floor, holding these artifacts of her former self. She had been somebody once before Marcus convinced her that her value lay in supporting his ambitions rather than pursuing her own. She had built brands, created campaigns, turned struggling companies into success stories. She could do it again. She could rebuild herself from the ground up, create something Marcus couldn't take from her. She could become the kind of woman who wouldn't just survive his betrayal, but transform it into fuel for something better. But first, she had to face a truth that felt like swallowing glass. Marcus wasn't going to face consequences that truly mattered to him. Federal prison would be a temporary inconvenience for a man with unlimited resources and connections. He would emerge in a few years, still wealthy, still powerful, still the father of her children. The only way to truly defeat him was to make him irrelevant to her own story. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began researching something she had never considered before: how to disappear from a life that had become a prison. Not literally, but financially and socially. How to reinvent herself so completely that Marcus's ability to hurt her would simply evaporate. She discovered a world of legal strategies for starting over, for women who needed to escape the financial webs woven by abusive husbands, offshore accounts, shell companies, international business structures that could protect assets from domestic litigation. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a spark of the woman she used to be. She had skills Marcus had made her forget she possessed. She understood markets, consumer psychology, brand building. She could create something he couldn't touch, couldn't steal, couldn't destroy. The federal case against Marcus would proceed without her. The divorce would play out in courtrooms where expensive lawyers traded accusations and assets. But Sarah was done being a victim in other people's stories. She was ready to become the author of her own resurrection. But before she could begin rebuilding, she needed to finish tearing down. There was one more revelation waiting in Jake's investigation. One final betrayal that would complete her understanding of just how long Marcus had been planning her destruction. And this one would change everything. Jake called at 7 in the morning, his voice tight with an emotion Sarah couldn't identify. "We need to meet. Now. There's something else. Something I didn't want to tell you over the phone." They met at the same coffee shop in Los Feliz, but this time Jake looked like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles ringed his eyes and his usually steady hands trembled as he slid a thin folder across the table. "Sarah, what I'm about to show you, it's going to hurt, but you need to know." Inside the folder were medical records, legal documents, and what appeared to be a private investigator's report. Sarah's name appeared throughout, but in context that made no sense. "I don't understand," she said, scanning a psychological evaluation dated 6 months before Emma and Michael's birth. "I never saw this doctor." "You didn't need to," Jake said quietly. Marcus hired a forensic psychologist to create a profile based on what he called observational data. Essentially, he was building a case that you were mentally unstable months before you even knew he was cheating. Sarah read the evaluation with growing horror. It painted her as suffering from paranoid delusions, emotional instability, and potential substance abuse issues. Every incident was carefully documented. Her concern about Marcus's late nights, her questions about unexplained expenses, her emotional reactions to his increasing distance. "This is insane," she breathed. "These are normal responses to discovering your husband is having an affair. To you and me, yes. But to a family court judge who doesn't know the context, it reads like a woman spiraling into mental illness." The next document was worse. It was a detailed plan titled Custody Transition Strategy, dated 8 months before the Tech Awards ceremony. Marcus had been planning to take the children before they were even born. The strategy was comprehensive and chilling. Phase 1 involved documenting Sarah's erratic behavior while gradually isolating her from friends and professional contacts. Phase 2 would trigger a public incident that would justify emergency custody measures. Phase 3 would relocate the children to a different state while Sarah dealt with the legal and financial aftermath. He orchestrated everything, Sarah realized, her voice hollow. The affair wasn't a betrayal of our marriage. It was a tool to destroy my credibility. It gets worse, Jake said, producing another set of documents. Look at this. The papers showed that Marcus had been planning to have Sarah committed to a psychiatric facility immediately after the baby's birth. He had already retained a psychiatrist willing to sign commitment papers based on postpartum depression and ongoing delusional behavior. My premature labor saved me, Sarah said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. If the babies had been born at term, he would have had me locked up while they were infants. Jake nodded grimly. The stress-induced complications actually disrupted his timeline. He had to move to the emergency custody strategy earlier than planned. Sarah stared at the evidence of Marcus's methodical preparation for her destruction. This wasn't the impulsive betrayal of a man who had fallen out of love. This was the calculated elimination of an inconvenient obstacle, planned with the same attention to detail he brought to corporate acquisitions. There's one more thing, Jake said reluctantly. I found this in Amber's medical records. The final document was an ultrasound report. Sarah studied the image for a moment before the implications became clear. She's not 4 months pregnant, Sarah said slowly. The ultrasound shows she's actually 6 months along. But here's the really twisted part. Jake pointed to a notation in the margins. This isn't Marcus's baby. Sarah looked up sharply. What? The timing doesn't work. Based on this ultrasound, Amber conceived in early February. Marcus was in Japan for the entire month on business. I checked his passport records. Then whose baby is it? Jake hesitated. Richard Steinberg's, Marcus's attorney. They've been having an affair while she was publicly involved with Marcus. The revelation was so absurd, so soap opera ridiculous, that Sarah almost laughed. Marcus had destroyed their marriage for a woman who was carrying another man's child, a woman who was apparently playing him as skillfully as he had played Sarah. Does Marcus know? I don't think so, but Amber and Steinberg definitely know. I have hotel records, credit card receipts, even surveillance photos. Sarah sat back in her chair, trying to process the complete insanity of the situation. Marcus had betrayed her for a woman who was betraying him. He had demolished their family to start a new one, with a child that wasn't his. He had planned her psychological destruction to gain custody of children he would abandon as soon as he discovered the truth about Amber's pregnancy. What are you going to do with this information? Jake asked. For a moment, Sarah considered the delicious irony of exposing Marcus's humiliation as publicly as he had exposed hers. She could leak the story to every media outlet, watch him experience the same shock and betrayal she had endured. But as tempting as that revenge fantasy was, Sarah realized she had moved beyond the need for it. Marcus's ultimate destruction would come from his own choices, his own blindness, his own arrogance. She didn't need to orchestrate his downfall anymore. She needed to focus on her own resurrection. I'm going to use it to get my children back, she said finally, but not the way you might think. That afternoon, Sarah called Margaret Chen and scheduled an emergency meeting. She arrived at the attorney's office with a new sense of purpose, carrying Jake's evidence like ammunition. Margaret, I need you to arrange a private meeting with Marcus and his legal team. Tell them I'm prepared to make a settlement offer they'll find very interesting. Margaret's eyebrows rose. What kind of offer? I'm going to give Marcus everything he wants. The house, the company stock, the art collection, everything, in exchange for joint custody of Emma and Michael to be exercised in California. Sarah, that's financial suicide. You'd be walking away from millions. Money doesn't matter if I don't have my children, but I'm not walking away empty-handed. Sarah explained her plan, watching Margaret's expression shift from concern to amazement to something approaching awe. It's brilliant, Margaret admitted. Completely insane, but brilliant. Are you sure you can pull it off? I spent 5 years helping Marcus build his empire. I know exactly how it works and exactly where it's vulnerable. He taught me everything I need to know to compete with him. And if he refuses the settlement? Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. He won't refuse, because I'm going to make him an offer that appeals to the one thing he values more than money, his ego. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at Margaret's office. Sarah spent the weekend preparing, researching, and planning the performance of her lifetime. She was about to gamble everything on her ability to manipulate the man who had manipulated her. But this time, she held all the cards he didn't know existed. As she laid out her strategy on paper, Sarah realized that Marcus's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating her intelligence or her resources. His greatest mistake had been teaching her exactly how ruthless she could be when everything she loved was at stake. The student was about to become the master. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of Los Angeles day that made the city feel full of infinite possibilities. Sarah dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without aggression. She wanted to look like a woman who had accepted defeat gracefully while hiding the steel beneath her silk. Margaret's conference room buzzed with tension as the opposing sides took their seats. Marcus arrived with his usual entourage: Richard Steinberg, 2 junior associates, and a financial advisor. He looked confident, well-rested, the picture of a man who had successfully navigated a difficult situation. Sarah sat alone except for Margaret, a deliberate choice designed to emphasize her apparent vulnerability. She had learned from Marcus that the best negotiations began with your opponent underestimating your position. "Thank you all for coming," Margaret began. "My client has a settlement proposal that we believe serves everyone's interests." Steinberg leaned back in his chair, radiating the smug confidence of a man holding all the winning cards. "We're listening, though I should note that Mr. Wellington's position has only strengthened since our last discussion." Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice calm and measured. "Marcus, I want to end this. The fighting, the media attention, the damage to both our reputations. It's not good for Emma and Michael, and it's not good for either of us." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. "What are you proposing?" "I'm prepared to relinquish all claims to marital assets. The house, the company stock, the investment accounts, everything. I want nothing except joint custody of our children, exercised in California." The room fell silent. Steinberg's confident expression flickered as he processed the implications. This wasn't the desperate counterattack they had expected. "In exchange for what?" Marcus asked suspiciously. "Your agreement to maintain the children's primary residence in Los Angeles and my right to equal parenting time. No more emergency relocations, no more supervised visits, a clean divorce with shared custody." Steinberg whispered urgently in Marcus's ear, but Marcus waved him off. Sarah could see the calculation in her husband's eyes. He was getting everything he had fought for financially, while appearing magnanimous in the custody arrangement. "What about the federal investigation?" Steinberg interjected. "Are you willing to testify that you initiated it maliciously?" Sarah had anticipated this question. "I'm willing to state that my emotional state during the investigation may have compromised my judgment, that my primary motivation was hurt feelings rather than genuine concern about financial impropriety." It was a careful answer that would undermine the prosecution's case without technically lying. Sarah was betting that Marcus's ego would prevent him from examining her motivations too closely. "This seems too good to be true," Marcus said finally. "What's the catch?" Sarah allowed herself a small, sad smile. "There's no catch, Marcus. I'm tired of fighting. I want to focus on being a good mother to Emma and Michael. They deserve better than parents who are constantly at war." She was telling the truth, just not the complete truth. She did want to focus on her children. She also wanted to build something that would make Marcus's financial victory irrelevant. Marcus and his team spent 20 minutes in hushed consultation while Sarah and Margaret waited. Sarah used the time to study her husband's face, looking for signs of the man she had once loved beneath the calculating stranger he had become. "We accept," Marcus announced finally, "with one additional condition. Sarah signs a non-disclosure agreement regarding all aspects of our marriage and divorce. Agreed, Sarah said without hesitation. Steinberg looked troubled by how quickly she had accepted, but Marcus was already moving forward, energized by what he perceived as total victory. We can have the paperwork ready by Friday, he said. Emma and Michael can return to Los Angeles the following week. As the meeting broke up, Marcus approached Sarah directly for the first time since the Tech Awards ceremony. I'm sorry it came to this, he said, though his tone suggested obligation rather than genuine remorse. I know, Sarah replied. We both made mistakes. She was lying, of course. She had made the mistake of trusting him. He had made the mistake of teaching her how to think like him. After Marcus and his team left, Margaret turned to Sarah with a mixture of admiration and concern. That was masterful, but are you sure you know what you're doing? You just walked away from a fortune. I walked away from his fortune, Sarah corrected. I'm about to build my own. That afternoon, Sarah began executing the plan she had been developing since her night in the closet. Using the business skills Marcus had made her forget she possessed, she started creating the infrastructure for her new life. Her first call was to David Chen, Margaret's brother who specialized in international business law. Her second was to Elena Rodriguez, a former colleague from her marketing days who now ran a successful consulting firm. Her third was to Jake Reynolds. I need your help with something completely different, she told Jake. I want to hire you to investigate corporate charity fraud. Not Marcus's case, but as a specialty for a new firm I'm starting. Jake was intrigued. What kind of firm? One that helps women who've been financially abused by powerful husbands. We'll provide legal support, financial planning, and media strategy. The charity fraud angle is just the beginning. By the end of the week, Sarah had incorporated a new company, opened business accounts, and begun assembling a team of professionals who shared her vision. She called it Phoenix Consulting because she liked the symbolism of rising from ashes. The divorce papers were signed on Friday in a brief business-like ceremony. Marcus got the house, the art, the investment portfolio, and what he thought was victory. Sarah got joint custody of Emma and Michael, a small settlement for immediate expenses, and her freedom. As they left the courthouse, Marcus stopped beside his Bentley. I hope we can be civil going forward, he said, for the children's sake. Of course, Sarah replied. I want what's best for them. Marcus drove away in his expensive car toward his expensive house, carrying his expensive victory. Sarah walked to her rental car in the courthouse parking garage, carrying the keys to a future he couldn't even imagine. That evening, she sat in her small apartment in Santa Monica, a temporary space she had rented while she planned her next moves. Emma and Michael would be returning on Tuesday, and she had spent the day preparing a nursery that was modest but filled with love. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the settlement announcement. You sure know how to lose gracefully. A cucked. Amber. Even in victory, she couldn't resist gloating. Sarah deleted the message without responding. She had bigger concerns than the petty cruelties of people whose lives were built on deception. On Sunday night, Sarah received a call from Dr. Vasquez with wonderful news. Emma and Michael had been cleared for discharge from the Austin hospital and would be flying back to Los Angeles the next day. After weeks of separation, she would finally hold her children again. Sarah spent Monday putting finishing touches on the nursery and preparing herself for the emotional reunion. She had survived Marcus's systematic betrayal, the loss of her financial security, and the temporary loss of her children. Now it was time to prove that survival wasn't enough. She was ready to thrive. Tuesday morning felt like Christmas and the first day of spring combined into one perfect moment. Sarah stood at LAX watching the gates for the medical transport, bringing Emma and Michael home. After 6 weeks in Austin, they were finally strong enough to leave the hospital and begin their lives in California. The babies had grown substantially during their separation from Sarah. Emma was alert and active, her dark eyes tracking movement and sound. Michael was more contemplative, content to observe the world with serious attention. Both were healthy, thriving, and undeniably beautiful. They're perfect, Dr. Vasquez said, completing their first checkup in Sarah's Santa Monica apartment. You can stop worrying about their prematurity. They're developing normally in every way. Sarah held Emma while Michael slept peacefully in his carrier, marveling at how much had changed since that terrible night at the Tech Awards ceremony. She had lost a fortune a marriage, and her illusions about the man she had loved. In return, she had gained clarity, purpose, and the unshakable knowledge that she could survive anything. Phoenix Consulting was already generating interest from potential clients. Word had spread through Los Angeles's networks of successful women about Sarah's situation and her plans to help others navigate similar crises. Her first official client was Rebecca Martinez, the wife of a real estate mogul who had discovered her husband's creative accounting. "He thinks I'm just the pretty wife who doesn't understand business," Rebecca explained during their consultation. "He has no idea that I was a forensic accountant before we married." Sarah smiled, recognizing the pattern. "They always underestimate us. That's their weakness." Phoenix Consulting's model was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of just providing legal or financial advice, they offered comprehensive support for women extracting themselves from abusive power dynamics. Sarah's team included attorneys, accountants, private investigators, and media strategists, all working together to level playing fields that had been deliberately tilted against their clients. Jake had officially joined as their head of investigative services, bringing his contacts and expertise to bear on cases involving corporate fraud and hidden assets. Elena Rodriguez handled media strategy, helping clients control their narratives instead of being controlled by them. The business grew organically through referrals and word of mouth. Sarah discovered that Los Angeles was full of women trapped in marriages to powerful men who had spent years systematically undermining their wives' independence and self-worth. Phoenix Consulting offered them something more valuable than legal representation, a path to reclaiming their power. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Sarah received an unexpected call from Margaret Chen. "You need to see the news," Margaret said, her voice carrying an odd mixture of satisfaction and concern. Sarah turned on CNN to find Marcus's face filling the screen. The headline read, "Tech CEO arrested in charity fraud scandal." The federal investigation had finally culminated in indictments. Marcus and Diane were being charged with embezzling over $8 million from the Wellington Digital Foundation, money that was supposed to fund technology education in underserved communities. But the real bombshell came in the reporter's next sentence. Wellington was also arrested on charges of fraudulent paternity claims after DNA testing revealed that the child he claimed to father with his former public relations executive is actually the biological son of his attorney, Richard Steinberg. Sarah stared at the screen in amazement. Amber's deception had finally been exposed, and the fallout was spectacular. Marcus had been arrested at the hospital where Amber was giving birth to another man's child. Steinberg had also been arrested, his legal career effectively over. The irony was almost too perfect to be real. Marcus had destroyed his marriage for a woman who was playing the same game against him. He had planned Sarah's psychological destruction only to experience his own public humiliation on an even grander scale. Sarah's phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comment on Marcus's arrest. She declined all interviews, honoring the non-disclosure agreement that was now protecting her more than it was protecting him. She had moved beyond the need for public vindication. That evening, she sat in her modest apartment, feeding Emma while Michael played contentedly on his blanket. The space was a fraction of the size of their Malibu mansion, but it felt more like home than any place she had lived since college. Jake stopped by with updates on the federal case and news about Phoenix Consulting's rapid expansion. "We have 12 new client inquiries this week," he reported. "The Martinez case generated a lot of attention. Rebecca got 60% of their assets plus full custody. And her husband? Under investigation for tax evasion and money laundering. Turns out Rebecca's forensic accounting skills were better than his creative bookkeeping." Sarah smiled, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from helping someone reclaim their power. This was better than any revenge she could have planned against Marcus. She was building something positive from the wreckage of her marriage, creating value instead of just destroying it. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the news about Marcus. Hope you're happy now." Amber again, apparently still trying to blame Sarah for the consequences of her own deceptions. Sarah blocked the number without responding. She had no energy left for the petty dramas of people whose lives were collapsing under the weight of their own lies. That night, after the babies were asleep, Sarah stood on her apartment balcony looking out at the Pacific Ocean. 6 months ago, she had been the wife of a billionaire, living in luxury and believing in a future that was built on lies. Now she was a single mother in a one-bedroom apartment, building a business that helped other women escape the kinds of traps she had fallen into. By any conventional measure, she had lost everything. By the measures that actually mattered, she had won everything that counted. Her phone rang one final time. Dr. Vasquez. Sarah, I have some news I thought you'd want to hear privately before it becomes public, Elena said. Amber Cross was admitted to the hospital tonight with complications from postpartum depression. She's being held for psychiatric evaluation after making threats against you and the babies. Sarah felt a chill. What kind of threats? Nothing specific enough to be actionable, but concerning enough that the hospital contacted police. I wanted you to be aware in case you need to take precautions. After hanging up, Sarah checked the locks on her doors and windows, then looked in on Emma and Michael sleeping peacefully in their cribs. She had spent so much energy focused on Marcus's betrayal that she had almost forgotten about Amber, the woman whose own deceptions had ultimately destroyed the life she had thought she was stealing. But Sarah refused to live in fear of the damaged people she was leaving behind. She had work to do, children to raise, and a future to build that was entirely her own creation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients, and new opportunities to transform pain into purpose. Tonight she would sleep peacefully for the first time in over a year, surrounded by the only wealth that truly mattered, the love of her children and the knowledge that she had survived the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger. The phoenix had risen, and she was just getting started. 1 year later, Sarah stood before a congressional subcommittee on financial abuse, holding her testimony with steady hands. Emma and Michael, now healthy toddlers, sat in the gallery with their nanny, occasionally babbling commentary that made the assembled lawmakers smile despite the serious nature of the hearing. The financial abuse of women in high-asset marriages is a systematic problem that requires systematic solutions, Sarah testified. When powerful men use their resources to isolate and control their wives, they're not just destroying individual families. They're perpetuating a culture that treats women as assets to be managed rather than partners to be respected. The hearing was the culmination of a year-long investigation into corporate-assisted spousal abuse, sparked by the Marcus Wellington case and amplified by Phoenix Consulting's documentation of similar patterns across dozens of high-profile divorces. Sarah had become an inadvertent expert on the intersection of corporate fraud and domestic manipulation. Her company had handled 87 cases in its first year, recovering over $200 million in hidden assets and helping women escape marriages built on deception and control. The media had dubbed her the Phoenix, a title that initially embarrassed her, but that she had grown to embrace. She was proof that losing everything could be the first step toward gaining something better. Mrs. Wellington, Senator Patricia Hamilton said during the question period, what would you say to women who are currently trapped in similar situations? Sarah thought about the dozens of clients she had worked with, women who had believed they were powerless until they discovered they weren't. I would tell them that their intelligence, their instincts, and their worth are not determined by their husband's opinions of them, Sarah said. I would tell them that financial dependence is not the same thing as helplessness. And I would tell them that the skills that made them successful before marriage didn't disappear just because someone convinced them those skills didn't matter. She glanced at Emma and Michael, who were the reason for everything she had built since that terrible night at the Tech Awards ceremony. Most importantly, I would tell them that their children are watching how they respond to adversity. We can teach our kids that betrayal is devastating, or we can teach them that betrayal is survivable. We can show them how to be victims, or we can show them how to be victors. After the hearing, Sarah walked out of the Capitol building into a Washington, D.C. afternoon that felt full of possibility. Jake walked beside her, carrying files for 3 new cases they would begin investigating the following week. How does it feel to be a congressional witness? He asked. Like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, Sarah replied. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena Rodriguez, who was handling Phoenix Consulting's West Coast operations while Sarah was in Washington. 2 new clients today, both referrals from the Martinez case. Business is booming. Sarah smiled, remembering the woman she had been a year ago, sitting in her Malibu mansion and believing her life was perfect. That woman had been living in a beautiful prison, mistaking her cage for a castle. That evening, she video called Emma and Michael from her hotel room, watching them play with blocks while their nanny supervised dinner. They were healthy, happy, and utterly unaware that their father was serving a 5-year federal sentence for charity fraud and conspiracy charges. Marcus had been transferred to a minimum security facility in Oregon after pleading guilty to all charges. His legal team had negotiated a deal that would allow him to serve his time quietly, away from media attention. Wellington Digital had been sold to a competitor, its employees scattered to other companies. Amber had spent 3 months in psychiatric treatment before disappearing entirely from public view. Richard Steinberg had been disbarred and was facing his own federal charges. Their son was being raised by Amber's parents in Austin, far from the wreckage of his biological parents' crimes. Sarah felt no satisfaction in their downfalls, only relief that the toxic dynamics that had nearly destroyed her family had finally been exposed and dismantled. She had moved beyond the need for their suffering to validate her pain. Her phone rang. Margaret Chen. "I have news," Margaret said, her voice carrying barely suppressed excitement. "The Department of Justice wants to hire Phoenix Consulting as consultants on a federal task force investigating financial abuse. It would be a 3-year contract worth millions." Sarah considered the offer. Federal consulting would mean resources to help thousands of women instead of dozens. It would mean legitimacy, influence, and the ability to change systems instead of just helping individuals escape them. "What would it mean for our current clients?" Sarah asked. "We'd need to expand significantly, hire more investigators, more attorneys, more support staff. Basically, we'd become the leading authority on financial abuse in the country." Sarah thought about the congressional hearing, about the senators who had listened intently to her testimony, about the dozens of women whose cases had brought them to this moment. "Tell them yes," she said, "but I have one condition. The contract has to include funding for a victim support program, not just investigation and prosecution, but counseling, financial planning, and job training for women trying to rebuild their lives." Margaret laughed. "I'll write that into the proposal. Sarah, you realize what this means, right? You've turned your divorce settlement into a social movement." After hanging up, Sarah walked to the window of her hotel room and looked out at the lights of the nation's capital. Somewhere in those buildings, laws were being written that would protect women from the kind of systematic abuse she had experienced. Somewhere in those offices, prosecutors were building cases against men who thought their wealth made them untouchable. She thought about the woman she had been in that Malibu mansion, 7 months pregnant and dreaming of a future that was built on lies. That woman had lost everything and found herself. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began writing the proposal that would turn Phoenix Consulting into a national force for change. She wrote about the patterns of abuse she had documented, the legal reforms that were needed, the support systems that could help women rebuild their lives after escaping financial manipulation. As she wrote, Emma and Michael appeared on her laptop screen via video call, babbling their first attempts at Mama and reaching toward her image. They were her inspiration and her reason, the proof that surviving betrayal was just the first step toward building something beautiful from its ashes. The tech billionaire who had kissed his mistress on stage had thought he was writing the end of Sarah's story. Instead, he had written the beginning of a new chapter that was bigger, more important, and more powerful than anything he had ever built. Sarah closed her laptop and prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to transform pain into purpose. She had learned the most important lesson of her life, that a woman who truly understood her own worth was unstoppable. The phoenix had not just risen, she had taken flight, and she was just getting started. In the final analysis, everyone in this story got exactly what they deserved. Marcus got the consequences of his choices, Amber got the results of her deceptions, and Sarah got something infinitely more valuable than the fortune she had walked away from. The knowledge that she could build a life that was entirely her own creation, powered by her own skills, and protected by her own strength. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover that you never needed it in the first place. Sarah Wellington's story isn't just about one woman's triumph over betrayal. It's about something much more powerful. The moment when we stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What can I build from this?" In a world where we're constantly told that our worth comes from what we have, who we're married to, or how others perceive us, Sarah discovered something revolutionary. Real power doesn't come from what someone can give you. It comes from what they can never take away. Your intelligence, your resilience, and your ability to create value in the world. The billionaire who thought he was writing the end of her story actually wrote the beginning of something he could never control or destroy. He taught her the most valuable lesson of all, that a woman who truly understands her worth is absolutely unstoppable. Here's what I want you to remember from Sarah's journey. Every betrayal carries within it the seeds of transformation. Every loss creates space for something better. And every time someone underestimates you, they're actually handing you a secret weapon. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about resilience and redemption, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Sarah's transformation resonated most with you? Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the ground up? And if you believe these stories of strength and triumph need to be told, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear that their current chapter isn't their final one. Because the best stories aren't about people who never fall down. They're about people who get back up, dust themselves off, and build something beautiful from the pieces. Subscribe for more incredible true stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when life tests them the most. Because trust me, we're just getting started with stories that will restore your faith in the human spirit. Until next time, remember, you're not just surviving your story, you're writing it.